fortifications that were built after the War of 1812. Initially, they were called the Atlantic Coastal Defense Fortification System. And they didn't have an acronym for that, so later on they changed it to the third system of forts. And so when you talk about these coastal forts and somebody says third system, basically they're talking about these forts. There were 42 of them built between 1820 and 1853. From Maine, all along the coastline, major ports, major cities along the coast, all the way to the Florida Keys. And then in the Dry Tortuga is one of the largest ones. And then around the Gulf Coast, there's about a dozen and a half. And then the last two, 41 and 42, are built in California in the 1850s. They were all designed by the same guy. It was a French architect, that James Madison, when he was president. He sent agents to France to find a good military fortifications engineer and architect to come over here and design and build these things. This is an early one, but not one of the earliest. Like I said, they started building them in like 1822. This one they started building 1829. Took them 18 years to finish it. So April of 1847 is when it was completed. What you see in here as far as brickwork today is 92% original as of probably Thanksgiving of 1862. The battle here was in April of 1862, April the 10th and the 11th. It took the Union Army, once they reoccupied the fort, almost 4.5 to 5 months to fix all the battle damage. And of course, there's no brick factories in Union hands that were big enough to support with additional bricks to fix the battle damage. So they basically used the battle damage debris brick to fix it. The primary damage was in this southeast corner. There were 3 large holes completely through the walls there. So they had to fix those first so the fort would be a secured area. And then everything else, they used the rest of the bricks for. So battle damage up here in the north wall, northeast corner, the east corner, the back wall. There's still, that damage. If you get up there and you look at it, you'll just find that they destabilized those loose bricks by slathering concrete on top. And that was them. We haven't done anything other than maintain it since. The back wall here was about a third of it was damaged, more than 50% of its height. The corner over here, it's a little bit hard to see today, but halfway between 16 and 17 up on the parapet, you can see a vertical line of brown brick this side and red brick this side. Goes all the way around to halfway between the second and third casemate. There's another vertical line of red brick and brown brick. That whole parapet, after the second day of the battle, is gone 2 feet below the surface up there. So pretty heavily damaged. Casemate 15, you can see there's no gun port in that. Same way with 14, 13 is in the corner. That's where the breach was. Casemate 15 had a 15-foot in diameter hole completely blown through the wall. And then 14 had an 8-foot, 13 in the corner had a 6-foot hole blown through it. And that was on the first day of the battle. And the reason for that is the fort was designed to defend against cannons that were made in the 1840s. So by the time the 1860s come around, we've got a heck of a lot better metallurgy, and then we're starting to experiment with some really modern guns with rifling. Instead of shooting cannonballs, they're shooting bullets. And the large rifle cannons, the James rifles, were about 1.5 miles away on Tybee Island, about where the bridge touches down on the island over there, if you've been in that area. Those guns were good for about 4.5 miles. It's only 1.5 miles away. And they're shooting 64 and 84-pound shells at the wall. So they just blew through the walls like a hot knife through butter. Give you some idea. This map was drawn by the Union. It's getting pretty. Was drawn by the Union Army just before the battle. Kind of oriented to the north. This is north, so it's going to look upside down to you. But this is where the bridge crosses on Highway 80 onto Tybee. Of course, they didn't have the technology to build a road on McQueen's Island at this time in that swamp. But there were fishing villages and farms on Tybee Island. So this wagon trail was here because the major inland wharf was here on Goat Point. But anyways, Fort Pulaski is a naval defense fortification. The eastern corner of it, this corner, is about 1.5 miles from the mouth of the river. So we have the Tybee Road out here. It's kind of like a bay. We have the south channel of the Savannah River, which is the primary channel going up to the city and the port of Savannah, and then the north channel. The north channel is about 1/2 mile that way. South channel is about 3/4 mile this way. Now the reason why they use the south channel is a little shallower down there, and it's in between these land masses. So when weather got bad, the small sailing ships and the steamships could pull in there and anchor and be protected by the land masses. Not much of land mass. I mean, our island's only 6 feet above sea level, but it's still going to interrupt that high winds. Same way with over here on McQueen's Island and Big Tybee. It's going to protect them. By 1900, the ships have gotten so big now they can't use the South Channel. They closed the channel, shut down the old Cockspur Lighthouse in 1909, the little one that's out here, and they start dredging the North Channel. And they've been using the North Channel now since about 1880. They're continuing to dredge it. I mean, you can see sometimes out there 3 and 4 container ships passing each other going out to sea or coming in. It's a little straighter shot up to the city than the South Channel. It's a little bit curvier, but like I said, this is relatively shallow. But that gives you some idea. The Union Navy would not come up the river to attack the fort because they knew the fort was designed to shoot at ships on the river. So they dropped about 3,500 Union soldiers off on the north shore of Tybee Island. They built 11 artillery batteries along that shore from about 1,750 yards away out to about 3,500 yards. This is the current lighthouse out here. These 11 batteries, total of 36 cannons, are going to fire on the fort in April of 1862. You can kind of see their angles of fire here. Now, they put all their experimental rifle cannons at the shortest distance. So I've got 5 30-pound Parrott rifles. The big gun down by the flagpole is a 30-pound Parrott. They've got 5 of those. They've got 5 James rifles, a 48-pounder, 2 64-pounders, and 2 84-pounders, all in these 4 batteries. And then the other 2 batteries are modern Civil War era smoothbore cannons called Columbiads, and they're shooting an 8.5 to 9-inch cannonball. Basically, that's an 1861 Columbiad up there in the corner. And their ranges on those are around 4,000 yards. So they're shooting a cannonball, they're pounding the brickwork loose up there, and once it's loose enough, then the rifle shots are going to run right through it. Inside the fort itself, the Confederate forces have about 385 soldiers in here. They've got 48 cannons. Up till about a day before the battle, they're not sure where the Union Army is going to come from. They don't know if the Union Navy is going to come up the river and try to engage the fort. They're going to have to protect the fort itself. So they're going to spread all 48 of their guns out on all 5 walls. So on the roof and in the ground level. They do know that some of the Union Navy Army has gotten up into the tributaries to the north side of the Savannah River, and they've gotten into some of the southern tributaries south of the river, and they've got onto some of the western islands that are about 1.5 miles away, and they started building large gun batteries on those islands that could shoot at the fort. So they spread all 48 of their cannons out on all 5 of the walls, and then on the 8th of April, which was the original start of the battle, the Union Army pulls down all their camouflage over there on their short-range batteries that the Confederates didn't know were there. And now they realize that the Union Army Navy is not coming up the river. They're going to be engaged by these guys right over here. And so at that point, he's only got 24 of his cannons in the fort that he can use. And that's the guns on the southeast wall, the roof, and the south wall. Everything else cannot traverse around 180 degrees and don't have the range. And then, of course, you can't just pick up a 10,000-pound barrel and move it over there overnight. especially when they did some additional defensive stuff up on the roof, which is going to not allow them to do any movement at all. Any questions on this thing?
When, after the Confederates surrendered, did they just come across on boats, or?
Yeah, they left Goat Point here on flat bottom boats, either poling or rowing across. There was already a contingent of officers here that were signing the surrender, so all the Confederate troops in here had stacked their rifles and went into their living quarters. That was what they were told by the Union officers who were here. And then that allowed, those guys to come across without any problem.
I got you.
And then they just occupied.
They just put up a white flag, pretty much.
Yeah. Don't want to look at that, you can pass that around. Sorry.
Are you good?
Yeah.
I have a question. How did the cannons fire all the way, like the cannons fired all the way to the island?
Oh, they were well within range. So most of those cannons that were going to do most of the damage were only about 1.5 miles away, and they could shoot almost 4 miles.
They had, I believe they had like telescopes or scopes of some kind.
Yeah, a little 3-power telescope.
Yeah. Well, I'm saying like the officers could see where they were hitting and stuff. Yeah. So they could see where they were very accurate with those guns.
Yeah. Especially when you're hitting brickwork with a cannonball that big or a shell that big, what's going to happen is it's going to blow up a nice column of orange brick dust, and you'll be able to see exactly where that shell's hitting. One other thing with this, you can see that this is the island when they built this fort is only 1.5 miles long by 1 mile wide, and the white area here is really not solid ground. It's a compacted sandbar. There's no bedrock underneath this island. The rest of the island is salt marsh with oyster beds. And initially, it wasn't called Cockspur Island; it was called the Peeper. And one of the legends was it peeped out from under the water twice a day during low tide. I mean, it's 6 foot above sea level, 1.5 miles from the mouth of the river. And you can see all the tides, king tides, storm surges, everything are just going to sweep the island. So when they started building the thing, the first thing they did was build a dike around it, and that's the red line. And that kind of held that stuff off. The dike was about 10.5 feet tall. Kind of helped dry the ground out. Of course, it's never going to dry it out completely because the water's going to permeate from underneath. But it dried out enough to build this monster. Now I'll give you, somebody's going to shuffle my card. Give you an idea, this is what the fort looked the day after the battle. You see that large hole is about 15 feet in diameter. You also can see from the brick wall of the fort out to the river, there's no trees or anything left on this island. There's never was. It's a salt marsh swamp until about the late 1880s, and then with no guardians here, no maintenance, then the trees and stuff start growing. Most of the damage in this area right here, it's about 100 linear feet, was part of the construction or reconstruction of the fort by the Union Army, where they blocked up all these and rebuilt the parapet up there. Everything outside of that, this is the south wall all the way to the corner over here, all this battle damage is still there, and you can actually still see this cannonball sticking on the wall out there. And everything from about here to the east corner, that whole southeast wall, there's about 450 shell holes in that wall from the water level up that are still out there. They weren't structural damage, so they just left them alone. Plus, they didn't have the brickwork to fix it. Here's a close-up of that large hole and the next one to it. They actually literally blew the first 4.5 feet of the thickness of the outer wall away. The outer wall is 7.5 feet thick. This guy is actually standing in the middle of the moat out there. The moat's 42 feet wide out there, 8 feet deep. It's completely filled with brickwork that was blown off the wall. So he's standing right there with his feet dry. The large timber that you see here, and there were other ones laying down, the big granite gun positions up on the roof were actually supported by 15 by 15 inch timbers 2 feet below the surface. That supported that granite blocks up there. You can actually see some of those timbers underneath this one. And that just gives you some idea of when they blew that parapet wall away up there, it was actually 2 feet below the surface. So where you can actually see that. Now, one of the things that restricted them from moving things around were traverses. And what a traverse is was a sandbag pyramid. And they put these sandbag pyramids up every 2 cannons. And that's so a cannonball wouldn't go down linear down the wall and take out more than 1 cannon. They were the width of the grass area on the roof, which is about 26 feet. The upper parapet wall is 5.5 feet. They were 2 feet taller, so 7.5 feet by 26 feet wide. And then depending on the width where they were put up will be different throughout. But some of the James rifles that were coming through this corner were going through that 5.5 foot thick brick wall up there and going 12 feet into the sandbags. And it was solid sandbags, which is pretty tough. You can see this one sandbag up here is almost, or pyramid's completely shot away. There's no individual sandbags there anymore.
Thank you.
Give you some idea. So you blew the first 4.5 feet of the walls off. You can see this large overhang here on the wall. And again, this is just on this side of the corner, so you don't see as much of the brick in the moat on this one, but you can see that big timber still laying there. You can see most of the parapet goes all the way around the corner, is completely gone. And like I said, probably right about here, everything on the south wall is still out there that was there at the end of the battle.
I'll get you.
You guys,
I can see him well from where you're holding him.
yeah. This gives you a pretty good idea. This is looking down the southeast wall, this wall from the east corner. All these shell holes are still out there today. It's well worth walking around out there. Again, this one you can see pretty much the brickworks all the way from the wall of the fort out to the wall of the moat.
Is this a little bit like the Titanic thinking? Everyone thought the fort couldn't be taken, and then
The standards, when they finished it in the papers here, it said Fort Pulaski completed. Military says that you might as well shell the Rocky Mountains than Fort Pulaski. So they pretty much considered it as pretty well indestructible. But for the 1840s, or even the early 1850s, it probably was. But by the late 1850s, early 1860s, the new artillery is just going to rip through it. And they didn't modify it at all. This is inside casemate 16. The cannon that's in there was on the floor. It's not on the carriage anymore. The brickwork that's just below that is the brickwork that was blown out of that gun emplacement. The brickwork at the bottom is actually the brickwork from casemate 15, where they actually penetrated the wall in the first part. This is a Union soldier sitting here. A lot of times what was happening to the guns, even the guns inside the casemates over here, the Union artillery, especially the 30-pound Parrott rifles, were shooting about 1.25 miles away. They were literally shooting through the gun ports and hitting the guns on the muzzle and blowing them off the carriage. Now, it didn't take them one shot. It would take them multiple shots. But almost all the guns on the ground level here were knocked out by the 30-pound Parrott shooting through the gun ports.
It's amazing more people weren't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, the Union Army fired 5,200 shells at the fort in a 30-hour battle. Confederates fired about 5,000 back. Casualty rates on both sides are about the same, 1.5 wounded and 1 killed on each side. That's pretty amazing. Actually, the Union casualties went up 2 days after the battle. They were in here cleaning up shells that were laying everywhere. And they had an 84-pound James they picked up. They had like ice tongs. And when you pulled up on it, clamped onto the shell. And there were 4 guys lifting this thing up, and when they pulled it up on it, went off and killed the 4 Union soldiers. And the sergeant took his leg off, and he died about 2 days later. So the casualties after the battle were worse than what they were as far as killed in action. I want to show show you one that's got a halfway decent traverse. Okay, this is up pretty close. It's either side of the east corner. I can't remember which side. But you can see one of the traverses here, how large they were. There's one in here where there's another cannon in between these two. Formal sandbag, defense places. And you can see where a couple shells have hit this one, damaged it a little bit. Now the mortar over here is an 8 or 9 inch mortar. You can see that the top of it's damaged. That's a 9 inch mortar down by the flagpole. That took this one out of service. This gun has been blown completely off of its parapet mounting point up there. There's not a lot of damage to it. What it did though is hit that granite block assembly, tore the block assembly up, and it just fell back off of it. This gun is pretty interesting because that gun is above casemate 24 today. That's the original gun. That's the original picture of it.
Where did they get the granite? Was there granite in this area?
There's granite in western Georgia, eastern Alabama. Call it Granite State over there. But in the 1830s, 40s, when they were building this thing, it was a lot easier to get the granite out of the granite quarries along the Hudson River, put them on a ship, then drag them across the whole state using ox carts. So all of our granite in here is pretty much from New York, which is not the granite state. I think Connecticut's the granite state. And then we don't have any brown sandstone in this area at all. So the capstone that runs all the way around and the ledge that goes around the outside and the decoration under the windows, the slots along the floor here, that all came down from brown sandstone quarries in Connecticut. And they have a real good pedigree. That brown sandstone is used for the brownstones in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia. That's, I think it was the Portland Sandstone Quarry or something like that is where they come from. There you go.
That's right up there.
Yeah, we have 3 guns in the fort that are still here from the battle. Again, this is in the southeast corner. You can see, because that was the heaviest damaged area, this transverse is pretty well shot to pieces. It's pretty much just a big pile of sand. You can see the gate assembly or the circle of the sheet of the iron up there. This cannon was hit by a 30-pound Parrott rifle about an hour and a half into the battle. We have in one of the Confederate officers' journals. It was a solid shot from a 30-pound Parrott. Of course, it's cast iron. When it hit the front of that iron barrel, it just turned it into shards. And the shards went down both sides of that cannon and wounded the gun crew. There's 7 to 9 guys on a gun crew on one of these siege guns. That gun is still up on the corner, and it still has a big chunk missing out of it. It did not service after this, after that hour and a half in the first day of the battle. What else is on here? You can see a 9-inch mortar kind of laying here in the ground off of its carriage. But that's primarily the main thing, and show you that the main battle damage on this traverses.
The photographic collecting of evidence seems scientific. Was that part of the
These are just out of about 700 photographs. We just picked the best ones that we can use for the talk. The guy that took these was Brady. He was the best known photographer during the Civil War. He was his assistant.
He was on scene for that. They started taking photos the next day.
Yeah, he was kind of embedded with the troops when they got here, and so the day after he starts taking the pictures. And most of these were taken from a glass 4-inch by 4-inch plate, glass plate photograph.
That's amazing.
And you can just, we've got some that are twice the size, and you don't lose any of the definition or the quality of the picture. This is looking from the southwest corner down into the triangular island called the Demaloon. Now the Demaloon out there today, they modified that between 1866 and 1869. They put 4 underground powder magazines in there, and then in 1890 they built 3 large modern gun positions up there for 2 gun positions for the new breech loaders and stuff for the Spanish-American warriors. But this is what it kind of looked like from the end of construction up until the 1866 time period. It's just a triangular island out there. It has a 12 to 15 foot parapet that goes around it. You can see part of that here. Here's the moat where the sidewalk walks up to. Our visitor center kind of sits about right here today. You can see that parapet. Around that parapet that went around the whole edge of the thing, there's 26 gun emplacements for howitzers like this. It was an anti-personnel thing. The whole purpose was to protect the door, the main door of the fort.
I thought when they lost the battle that they had declared that this was obsolete. So why did they come back and redo some of it?
They used it until 1875. So, and I'll get to you in a minute. Hold on to that. I'll get.
Sorry.
But what you're looking at in here, you can see a lot of storage of cannonballs, additional carriages. There's the mess hall, the mess kitchen for the garrisons in here. I got another picture that'll kind of show you over here. There's a guard shack and a blacksmith shop in there. There's also this little building here. It kind of looks like a church. It's got a big steeple on one end. It's got a little building with a bunch of windows on the side. That's a hot shot furnace. There were 3 of them here. There was one out there, there was one in that corner, and one in this corner. A very dangerous way to shoot live powder cannons in the day. So by the late 1850s, they stopped doing it. It was primarily an anti-shipping thing. I mean, you could heat that cannonball up to red hot in that furnace, take it out of there, put it in your cannon, and fire it at a wooden ship. You blow a big hole in the ship, plus that cannonball would lay in there and set everything on fire on the inside. But loading that cannon with a red-hot cannonball on top of a linen or a flannel powder bag with black powder in it, just not, very safe. Little story I got here. If you get a chance to look at this really close, there's a wagon right here. See if you can tell what kind of a wagon that is. Okay? You got that? About 5 years ago, I had a guy here from the Savannah Fire Department, so I just gave it away. He was injured and he was assigned to the archives of the fire department up there. And I was telling him about the story here, and he said, "Do you know anything about fire engine number 8, Savannah Fire Department?" No. He said, "Well, the Confederate commander, about 2 weeks after they occupied the fort, requested from the Savannah Fire Department a fire engine in case there were fires created by a battle if it ever occurred." And so they sent a fire team down with the fire department fire engine, and that's actually fire engine number 8.
That's fire engine number 8. You
can see, if you look at it real close, you can see the copper or bronze burner in the middle of it. You can see the big pressure hands on the side of the thing. And later on, I found some documentation that it was actually had a nickname called the Wildcat 2. Was also on the side of it with engine number 8. And I never got back to talk to that guy because he finally retired before I got it back up to the archives. But it's pretty cool.
They pump seawater through it?
Actually, all the water here is all brackish, so it would have been partially salt, but wouldn't have made any difference if it
No,
put out the
but
fire.
they weren't using fresh water. They were pumping
Pump it right out of the boat, mostly, if they had to. I mean, most of the fires occurred. They built about 25 to 30 buildings outside during the construction because when you came onto the island to work, you worked the whole work season and you lived here. The Board of Engineers and the Corps of Engineers today were in charge of construction. So they housed them, they fed them. It was just like an infantry battalion basically out there, just workers. And a lot of those buildings are still here during the 1860s. And so shells from the Union Army that were actually passing over the fort were actually hitting those things and catching them on fire and destroying some of them.
It looks like a very similar setup to the Dry Tortugas.
Same architect?
Probably 3 or 4 times bigger.
Yeah, that's the second. For a long time, I thought that was the largest of the 42. It's not. It's number 2.
Oh.
So the largest is Fort Monroe, Virginia.
Oh, really?
So Fort Monroe, Virginia is number 1. Fort Jefferson.
I think I've seen the Fort Monroe one, but I just haven't been in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think now, since it was the longest active military fort for years, and then they turned it over. There's still some stuff in there, and actually you can rent apartments in there because a lot of the gun positions were much larger, and they turned them into BOQs and stuff like that during the active army. And now you can actually rent apartments and stuff inside that fort. It's huge. Give you some idea. This is the northwest corner. These buildings up here were all part of those temporary buildings that were used by the construction workers. Now, they weren't this nice. So in the late 1850s, the Union Army got a little bit more money in their budget here, and they started modifying them. So this large building here is actually a two-story hospital. Of course, you got to have an officers' club. That's here. The little white house over here is the post commander. He didn't live in the fort. He lived in his own little building. The pyramid tower thing here is actually a wooden flame marker light for the North Wharf. And you can kind of see a sailing ship out here in the North Wharf. But most of these buildings were all temporary mess hall or bathhouse or latrines or barracks that were built in by 1830 for the construction workers, and then they were modified. The ones that were still in halfway decent shape. Again, from the wall of the fort all the way out to the North Shore, there's no darn trees anywhere. And I'll tell you what happened after the battle here. They started putting more buildings out there. And so when they got the buildings built out there, they wanted roads so they could get to them, to walk on sidewalks. And then when they had that, in the middle of the summer, they found out it's really hot out here. They started planting trees along the roads. And so in 1875, when the fort was completely abandoned, from 1875 to 1933, when the CCC shows up here to clean the island up, to turn it over to the Park Service, nobody's doing any maintenance or caretaking of the island, so we end up with that rainforest out by the parking lot. That's covered up some of the foundations of some of the older buildings. None of the original buildings are here anymore, outside. But if you get up in that corner, you'll still see that much damage is still up there.
Was everything run by the soldiers, or did they have civilian workers?
They very few. They had some laundresses, which were one of the highest paid civilian jobs in here. Once the fort was activated, the Union Army were reoccupying. They had down in this one corner, they had a kind of a laundry down, bucket, washboard and stuff. They had about 6 laundresses there. They got paid monthly by the federal government. And I don't know if they stayed on the island for a couple days in a row, and then they took, most of them came from Hilton Head Island, because Hilton Head Island was the headquarters for the Union Army until the end of the Civil War. They pretty much chased everybody off that island, all the militia, all the plantation owners, all the slaves, everybody just took over all Hilton Head Island. Now, they had 14,000 soldiers up there on that island. But I think that's where they got most of them. And that's only a 5-mile boat ride. So, and I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have left them here longer than necessary. Okay, so this is in that corner of the demo, looking into our entrance. You can see additional carriages down here parked. Here's a little bit better shot of part of that hot shot furnace. This was the guard shack, and out behind it was the blacksmith shop. And again, you can see part of that sod parapet that went around. One good thing here is here's a really good example of one of those traverses that hadn't been damaged. A lot of people ask how they got stuff up on the roof. If you look in casemate 45 over there, there's a tripod device called a garrison, or a casemate gin. Gin was another name for engine. It was designed the height-wise to be able to move heavy material in and out of there, put cannon barrels up on carriages, that kind of thing. But up on the roof, they had one 3 times that size called a garrison gin. And you can see the garrison gin here. And so pulleys and ropes, no animals out here, mostly manpower, and that's how they're pulling the stuff up there. The setup on that garrison, or that casemate gin, is 5-to-1 with the 2 pulleys. There's 5 pulleys on it, or 5 wheels. They had pulleys up to 20-to-1. So 10,000-pound barrel, if piece of cake for a couple of guys to haul up there. Plus, when you look at that, when you walk around, there's a windlass on the inside between the two legs of that thing, and that's where the rope winds up when you're lifting stuff. Well, they had these hand spikes, they call them, and they had three lengths of them: a short one, a medium one, a long one. The longer the hand spike, the more leverage you had. So not only the leverage you had with the pulleys, but the leverage that you had that you were winding up the rope with was also there. Yeah. But it's still all manual labor.
Did they ever have temporary ramps or anything?
Not in here, because you would cover up, the ramps would have to be relatively shallow, and that would cover up 3 to 4 faces of your casemates. And then that would make it harder to move stuff around in there. So they never did have any permanent ones. There was a temporary one built by the Union Army initially in this corner to get their guns up there, because the guns they were bringing in here and putting up on the roof were real big siege weapons. I mean, we're talking anywhere from 12 to 17,000 pound barrels alone. And so they did need that. But by late 1863, it was gone, because everything was up there. They'd established the garrison gyms and stuff like that. Now, this is looking down this way. You can see the feeder canal here comes from the South River, South Channel. You can see a big steamboat down there. It's about 3/4 of a mile from the south wall. And again, nothing between the wall and the river. And you can see some of the original gun positions up on the roof were purely brick laid with an iron rail for the iron wheels of the carriage to move around as they moved it. The newer ones, the big granite ones, were put in late 1850. And the reason for that is the carriages on the older guns were taller than the newer carriages for the late 1850s, early 1860s. And they didn't realize that until they got them here, and then the guns couldn't shoot over the parapet. So they had to get the granite down here and build the granite parapet, or the extension for the firing positions.
An
There's still some original
failure,
ones.
huh?
Say again?
An engineering failure.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of them. But,
Communication failure.
well, it took 2.5 weeks to get a letter from here to the Board of Engineers in Washington, or actually it was in New Jersey at the time. And then somebody had to read it up there when they got around to it. And then their letter coming back would take another 2.5 weeks. And under regulations, the chief engineer couldn't do anything that they said he was authorized to do until he sent a letter acknowledging what they said he could do back up. I mean, and they did, but still you could see the communication problem.
I sometimes wonder if engineers, when they're designing things, if they ever field test them. Do they ever get out from behind their desk and go in the shop and actually check it to see if it works?
The architect that
designed?
designed all 42 of these was a sharp dude.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things that they just took for granted was right, and it worked. There was a couple things. So this was going to be a 2-story fort. I wonder, was anything else in here? Still a couple transverses out here. This was going to be a 2-story fort, and you'll find them single-story, 2-story, 3-story. Sumter was a 3-story. Jefferson was a 3-story. But they had the darn brickwork about this high in here by 1842, and they're starting to order more bricks from brick factories uptown. If the chief engineer asked one of the bricklayers how many bricks that they needed to have total for the whole roof, the guy told him 10 to 12 million more bricks. And when he said that, the guy's eyes got kind of big, and he goes, "What is the weight-bearing capability of the ground here going to hold that?" And they forgot to do one.
Yeah, of course.
And so deer in the headlights thing, they did a weight-bearing capability test, found out it wouldn't hold the second story. And so that's why we don't have a second row of casemates on the
It's
roof.
amazing how they got that many bricks out to the dry tortugas. Because it's like a 2.5 hour boat ride to get out there.
Well, and all their bricks came from New Orleans.
Yeah.
Didn't even come from the closest area because the brick factories are up there. Once fort was captured here, what was your question before?
Why did they come back and refortify it after it was already
Okay.
declared obsolete?
Keep that.
Again.
I'll get there. But anyways, I'm getting there this way. Short story, really long. So the Confederate Army is not going to come down here and reattack the fort. I mean, the United States Navy now has a blockade from Maryland all the way to the Florida Keys. What they're trying to do is stop all the importing, exporting to the south, because that's primarily how they're going to get their money. All their tobacco, cotton, and rice here is being primarily, 80% is being sold to Western Europe, England primarily. And so if they can cut that off, they're not going to have any money to buy weapons, black powder, pay for uniforms, get food for their troops. So it's a good idea. And that blockade stays out there from 1861 all the way to the end of the war. It works a little bit, but not, and in 6 months it's over kind of thing. Because they got down to eating their socks and stuff. And they started winning battles where they scavenged the food and the new artillery pieces from the Union Army, which was another problem. But anyways, they're not going to come down here and attack the fort. It would just be a waste of manpower and equipment to do that, especially with the blockade. So by late August, early September of '62, it's designated a safe zone. And so senior officers, captains and above, are allowed to bring their families here for the holidays. So from Thanksgiving to New Year's, they could have their kids running around, their wives, whatever. And of course, they had to be gone then. The Navy would bring them down from a specific Navy place like Philadelphia or whatever, and they would bring them down on a nice little trip to be with their husband. And then they had to be gone by New Year's. But from that point on, what they used the place for was actually a rest and relaxation depot. So there's quite a few major battles going along the Gulf Coast, halfway up the Mississippi to Vicksburg. We've got some pretty good battles in northern Florida. Loisty down there was a nasty battle. And so once those battles are over, they're bringing those units here, refurbishing their uniforms, fixing their muskets or whatever, letting them rest for about a month. And then they're shipping them out to another battlefield in the west or up north. Huh? So it basically becomes this rest and relaxation area. And it's manned basically until probably early 1864 by a regiment. And so a regiment's about 450, 475 troops. The fort's designed for 900, 1100 as a wartime garrison. And it has positions for 148 cannons. Just never gets it. And then there's not a need for that many troops here. Just to give you some idea what a regiment is, this is the 48th New York Volunteer Infantry out of Brooklyn, New York. They were the second regiment to man the fort. The first one was the 7th Connecticut. But they're up against the north wall here. They had a 150-man band. They had a 50-man drum corps. Of course, all pulled from the ranks. It's really interesting. You take an infantry private during the Civil War, and you take an infantry or a private that's in the drum corps as a drummer or a tin whistle guy, who's making the most money? Two privates. The musicians. They're going to get additional $20 over a guy that's out there standing up in front of muskets, because these guys were really essential to movement of troops. Their drum calls, that kind of stuff. You'll still see some remnants of the 48th New York. Casemate 42, on the ceiling in there, some of their patriotic paintings that they painted around June of '63 is when they left. And then casemate 42, 43, and 44 is where the drum corps and the band stored all their equipment over there. In the back at 43, above the gun port, you'll see headquarters or HQ drum corps painted on the wall. That's all original. But the painting on the ceiling in there is a large 8-point compass rose star, white and yellow. There's 2 ribbons that are painted. One says the Union, now one forever. The other one has the dates they were here, 1862 to 1863. You can't read that anymore. It's kind of, Mother Nature's taking this stuff away pretty much. Last couple, we always have questions about the timbers over here against the wall. That's another one of those defensive things that they had to do. Shrapnel during the time period the fort was built was relatively light. They were shooting 8.5 or 9-inch cannonball. It was hollow. They were filled with black powder. They put a fuse on it, and then when the cannonball was fired, the firing of the powder in the cannon would set that fuse on fire, and the length of it would determine how far it was going to fly before it blew up. They had charts for all that. So you'd get that thing to blow up, and it would blow up in like 4 big chunks if you were lucky. 2 to 3 was the average. It wouldn't fly very far because it's a big hunk of iron. So the big heavy timber doors that were in every one of these gun casemates literally protected the gunners in there from that stuff, unless they hit right on the door. But the Civil War, the 220-pound cannonballs that they're shooting out of the 12, 13-inch coastal mortars that are 3,500 yards away, they're shooting that thing up to 3,000 feet. It's a true high-angle mortar system, and it's coming down, and those things have sophisticated fuses on them, timed fuses that are, some of them are dangerous, in fact. And some of those 220-pound cannonballs are exploding 15 feet off the ground. They got 6 to 8 dozen lead and iron balls, about 70 caliber, and about that big. And that stuff is just throwing everywhere. So the heavy timber doors on the doors here is not going to help them. So the Confederate Army, in late November after Christmas, they lined the whole inside the fort with lumberyard timber, the large building timber of the day. That's a 15 by 15 inch timber. It's about 56 feet long. They put it on the wall at about a 40-degree angle all the way around the inside. That gave them a nice bomb-proof walk space to walk all the way around in, and double protection for the gunners and the casemates. This is actually a picture of that wall. Again, you can see a really nice traverse up there. Part of, they call them, not a rat hole, but this protected the backside because that was on there. They could have had shells coming from over there and hitting into the back. You can see one that's pretty well damaged here. It doesn't go far enough over this way to see the corner damage, but there's your timbers. Also, if you look at the parade field here, the parade field is pretty much nice and graded flat. So this has to be probably around June, July of 1862. Because the parade field looked like this, all 2.5 acres of it. And what they did, the whole length of this parade field, and you can actually see it if you look out or if you walk across. They dug trenches 3.5 to 4 feet deep called shot catcher trenches. And then above them you had a 2.5-foot berm of the dirt. And what that did was shells coming over, instead of them ricocheting, they would get caught in those trenches. So it was one of the additional defensive things. So the traverses on the roof, the blindage timber, and the shot catcher trenches were the 3 modifications that the Confederates did to help their defense in the fort. Now this wall is during that time period of 1830s, 40s, early 1850s, from a ship shooting from the center of the channel, which where they would have been, either side. This is out of range. Those 32 and 42 pound naval siege guns only could shoot about 800, 1,200 yards. So shooting over through the wall and hitting the back wall here would have been out of range. So that wall is only 18 inches thick on the inside. We've got senior officers living up here. We have 2 rooms down there that have junior officers. Then we have a mess hall, a supply room, a dispensary, an all-purpose room that they use for briefings and meetings and chapel on the weekends. So now it's well within range of the new guns. And so they tear that covered walkway down in late November of '61. And then they put up the timbers like they did over here. But unlike over here, they put 8 feet of dirt on top of them. Now we're not exactly sure where they got that additional dirt, because they're using the dirt out here that they're digging the trenches with to make the berms on both sides. This is a lot of dirt, 8 feet deep, the whole length of this wall. To show you how bad the cannons were, the 30-pound Parrott rifle, like that one, from a mile and a half away, penetrated the 8 feet of dirt into the 15-inch timbers and hit the wall right here. This is the entrance. Actually, if you look straight back here, the second door, and then the second window on the left-hand side, you'll see a little pot belly of darker brick. That's where that 30-pound shell hit the wall there. It didn't go through, but it knocked a big chunk out of the wall. That's where that came through. A second one went through down here, about halfway down the wall, and the CCC got the original plans and rebuilt that thing in 1935. And where it attaches to the wall is where that shell hit down here, so we can't see that any longer. But all these shell holes you see along the wall up here, which are above the covered walkway, most of those you can see to the right of where it's really black up there. You can see circular areas between the capstone and the roof, darker brick all the way down to the length of the little house on the end. You can see a couple of the chunks out of the capstone. They're all still in that picture. And the shell holes are here, multiple shell holes. The Union Army fixed those. To me, that's kind of cosmetic, but it's above the mess hall, living quarters and stuff, so they had to fix it. This one, to kind of show you, so this one's pretty much right after the battle because the parade ground's not graded yet, and they do have to regrade it. This one is probably somewhere between Thanksgiving and New Year's. Almost all the blindage is gone. They use a lot of that timber to build temporary gun positions on the roof because what they're doing is they're putting their large field guns like the 30-pound Parrott rifle doesn't have a position up there. They're putting them on temporary positions in between the permanent ones. They're going to put all their cannons on the roof.
Is that a picture of it right there?
Say again?
Is that what this is?
Yeah, this was sitting
Like
on one right
timber.
here. Yeah, and you can see a couple more down the wall here. The other thing I thought you'd pick up is the lady.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at her,
That's how you know it's the
she's got
holiday season.
multi-layered clothes on. I mean, that's just not. I mean, she's got jackets on top of sweaters on top of because it's in the wintertime.
Yeah.
And again, it's the only time they're allowed to be here anyway. But and this pitch is really kind of cool because this is the older carriage. And this big wheel on both sides is how they moved that gun back and forth on the upper carriage. And they made it taller. So when they ended up going to these carriages and later on, those carriages aren't as tall, and that's why they had to build up. And that's one of the reasons why they don't have them all the way around. For one thing, they ran out of money. Congress didn't send any more money down here in the late 50s. And a lot of the originals still with the brick and the iron, and they're still around most of the other areas. You can see where the carriage, movable pintle carriage would set on this thing. And there's still a couple of those up there. Again, this is looking towards Cockspur Island, or the Cockspur Lighthouse. The little lighthouse out there. Nothing between the walls of the fort and the river.